The storm was brutal that night, rain hammering the windshield like bullets as Diana fought to keep her aging pickup on the road. Thunder cracked overhead and the streets of the industrial district were abandoned, slick with oil and water. She'd just finished a double shift at Lou's Diner, her waitress uniform clinging to her tired body, tips barely enough to cover next week's rent. All she wanted was her small apartment and 8 hours of sleep. Then she saw him. A man stumbling along the sidewalk near the abandoned warehouses, his expensive black suit soaked through and clinging to his frame. Even through the rain-streaked glass, Diana could see the dark stains spreading across his white shirt. Blood. His movements were unsteady, desperate. He collapsed against a brick wall, one hand pressed to his side. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Hit the subscribe button and turn on post notification as I have another beautiful story for you tomorrow and I do not want you to miss it. Diana's foot hovered over the gas pedal. Every instinct screamed at her to keep driving. This was the kind of neighborhood where you didn't ask questions, where you didn't see things. But her hands turned the wheel anyway, pulling over 20 feet ahead of him. She sat there for a moment, engine idling, wipers scraping frantically. The man lifted his head. Even from this distance, even through the storm, his eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Not pleading. Not desperate. Just aware. Calculating. Diana pushed open the door and stepped into the rain. "Can you walk?" Diana's voice barely cut through the storm as she approached him, rain already soaking through her thin uniform. The man's eyes studied her with unnerving focus, like he was trying to solve an equation. Up close she could see the quality of his suit, tailored Italian maybe, the kind that cost more than she made in 6 months. The fabric was ruined now, dark with rain and darker with blood. His face was sharp, handsome in a dangerous way, with a jaw that looked carved from stone. "I can manage," he said, his voice rough but controlled. He pushed off the wall and nearly collapsed. Diana caught him, her shoulder taking his weight. Getting him into the truck was a struggle. He was heavier than he looked, all muscle beneath that expensive suit. She could feel him tensing with every movement, fighting to stay conscious. Once inside, he pressed his hand harder against his side, and Diana saw blood seeping between his fingers. "Hospital?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "No." The word was final, brooking no argument. "Somewhere safe. Just for tonight." Diana should have refused. Should have driven to the nearest emergency room and left him there. Instead, she pulled back onto the empty street and headed toward her apartment, the stranger's labored breathing filling the small cabin of her truck. Her building was a sagging 3-story walk-up in a neighborhood that had seen better decades. The elevator had been broken for 2 years. Diana half carried him up 2 flights of stairs, his expensive shoes leaving wet prints on the worn carpet. Mrs. Chin from 2B cracked her door open, took one look at them and quickly shut it again. Smart woman. Diana's apartment was exactly what it looked like. A studio that barely fit a bed, a couch and a kitchenette. But it was clean and it was hers. She guided him to the couch and he sank into it with a barely suppressed groan. "Let me see," she said, reaching for his jacket. His hand shot out, catching her wrist. The grip was iron and his eyes had gone cold, predatory. For a terrifying moment, Diana thought she'd made a fatal mistake. Then something shifted in his expression. He released her wrist and leaned back, closing his eyes. "I apologize." Diana's hands trembled slightly as she helped him out of his jacket and unbuttoned his shirt. The wound was a gash along his ribs, deep but clean. Not a knife. Something else. She cleaned it with vodka from her freezer, the cheap kind she kept for emergencies, and he didn't make a sound, just watched her with those calculating eyes. "You do this often?" he asked as she worked, his voice carrying a hint of dark amusement. "Patch up bleeding strangers in designer suits?" "First time." She pressed gauze against the wound and he finally flinched. "You get rescued by waitresses who don't ask questions?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Also a first." She taped the bandage down and handed him 2 painkillers and a glass of water. He took them without hesitation, which told her either he trusted her or didn't care. He suspected the latter. "The couch folds out," Diana said, suddenly exhausted beyond words. "There are blankets in the closet. I have to be at work by 6. "Thank you." He said it simply, but something in his tone made it sound like more than gratitude. like he was acknowledging something he hadn't expected to feel. Diana retreated to her bed behind the room divider, but sleep was slow to come. She could hear him moving occasionally, the careful movements of someone used to pain. Once she thought she heard him on the phone, his voice too low to make out words but the tone unmistakable. Authority, command. When her alarm went off at 5:30, the apartment was empty. The blanket was folded neatly on the couch. The bloody gauze and bandages were gone. On her small kitchen table sat 5 crisp $100 bills and a note in precise handwriting. Some debts can never be repaid. But I will remember. Diana stared at the money, then at the note. The paper felt expensive between her fingers, and something about the way the words were written, controlled, deliberate, sent a chill down her spine. She pocketed the bills, threw on her uniform and locked the door behind her. Whatever she'd stepped into last night was over now. The stranger was gone and she had a shift to get to. That's what she told herself as she drove through the morning darkness toward Lou's diner, still believing the most dangerous part of her night was behind her. Lou's diner sat on the corner of 5th and Market, a chrome and neon relic that had been serving coffee and scrambled eggs since before Diana was born. She pulled into the back lot at 6:15, only moderately late, and killed the engine. The $500 was tucked safely in her glove compartment, and she'd almost convinced herself it was just a strange, isolated incident. A wealthy man in trouble. A good deed done. Nothing more. The morning shift was already in full swing when she pushed through the kitchen doors. Lou himself was at the grill, flipping pancakes with the efficiency of 40 years' practice. He glanced up, his weathered face creasing into something between a smile and a scowl. Cutting it close, Sullivan. Sorry, Lou, long night. He grunted, which was as close to forgiveness as she'd get, and went back to his pancakes. Diana tied on her apron, grabbed her order pad and stepped into the organized chaos of breakfast rush. The diner was packed, construction workers fueling up before their shifts, office workers grabbing coffee to go, the usual collection of regulars nursing cups at the counter. Diana fell into the rhythm easily, taking orders, pouring coffee, delivering plates with mechanical efficiency. Her body knew this dance even when her mind was elsewhere. It was during a brief lull, while she was refilling the cream dispensers near the window, that she first noticed the car. A black sedan, sleek and expensive, parked directly across the street. Not unusual in itself, plenty of cars parked on Market Street. But something about it caught her attention. Maybe it was the tinted windows, dark enough to hide whoever was inside. Maybe it was the way it sat there, engine running, exhaust curling into the cold morning air. Diana shook her head and returned to work. Paranoia. That's all it was. One strange night didn't mean the world had suddenly become threatening. But 20 minutes later, when she glanced out again, the sedan was still there. And now she could see movement behind the windshield. 2 figures in the front seat, both facing the diner. One of them raised something to his face, binoculars maybe, or a camera, and Diana felt ice slide down her spine. You okay? Marcus, the line cook, touched her shoulder. You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm fine. The words came automatically, but her eyes stayed fixed on the sedan. As she watched, the passenger side window rolled down an inch. A man's face appeared in the gap, hard features, cold eyes scanning the diner's interior. Then he lifted a phone to his ear and his gaze locked directly onto Diana through the window. She couldn't look away. Couldn't move. The man spoke into the phone, never breaking eye contact, and even from across the street she could read the intent in his stare. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't coincidence. It was confirmation. The window rolled back up. The sedan's engine revved once and the car pulled away from the curb, disappearing into morning traffic. But Diana's hands were shaking so badly she had to set down the coffee pot before she dropped it. Diana. Marcus's voice seemed to come from far away. Seriously, what's wrong? Nothing, she lied, forcing her breathing to steady. Just tired. But as she went through the motions of her shift, taking orders, smiling at customers, pretending everything was normal, Diana couldn't shake the feeling that had settled in her gut like lead. The stranger from last night hadn't just been in trouble. He'd been in danger. And now, somehow, so was she. They came at 9:30, right in the middle of the breakfast rush. Diana was at table 6, taking an order from a regular, Mr. Hewitt, who always wanted his eggs over easy and his bacon crispy, when the bell above the diner's entrance chimed. She glanced up out of habit and felt her blood turn to ice. two men in dark suits walked through the door. Not businessmen. Not customers. The way they moved was wrong, too deliberate, too focused. Their eyes swept the diner with practiced efficiency, cataloging exits, identifying threats, and then landing on Diana with laser precision. She recognized them instantly. The sedan. These were the men from the sedan. Miss. Mr. Hewitt was looking at her expectantly, waiting for her to write down his order. You get all that? Diana couldn't respond. Couldn't breathe. The two men were moving toward her now, weaving between tables with unhurried purpose. Other customers glanced at them, sensing something off but not quite understanding what. The first man was tall, with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw. The second was shorter, built like a boxer, his hands dangling loose at his sides. They weren't trying to hide what they were. They didn't need to. Diana Sullivan? The scarred man's voice was polite, almost gentle. He stopped 3 feet from her table and his partner moved to flank her left side. Escape routes cut off with military precision. Her voice cracked. Can I help you? We just need you to come with us. Nice and quiet. No trouble. The scarred man's hand moved toward the inside of his jacket. Just a conversation. But Diana had seen enough movies, had lived in this city long enough to know what just a conversation meant when men like this came for you. Her eyes darted to the kitchen, to the front door, to anywhere that might offer escape. There was nowhere. No way out. The man's hand slipped inside his jacket, fingers closing around something cold and metallic. Then the diner's back door exploded inward. 3 men in black tactical gear burst through, weapons drawn and raised. Down. Everyone down. The lead man's voice cut through the diner like a whip crack. On the ground now. Everything happened at once. The scarred man yanked his gun free, spinning toward the new threat. His partner lunged for Diana, grabbing her arm with bruising force. Customers screamed, diving under tables, scrambling for the exits. Mr. Hewitt knocked over his water glass in his haste to hit the floor. Lou emerged from the kitchen with a metal spatula raised like a weapon, saw the guns and dropped behind the counter. Diana tried to pull away, but the boxer's grip was iron. He was dragging her backward, using her as a shield, and she could see his other hand reaching for his own weapon. The world narrowed to tunnel vision. The gun, the men in tactical gear, the terrible understanding that she was about to die in the middle of Lou's diner over eggs and coffee. A shot rang out. Not from the tactical team. From somewhere else. The boxer jerked, his grip on Diana releasing as he stumbled backward. The scarred man fired twice at the tactical team, then dove behind the counter as return fire shattered the pie display case. Glass and cherry filling exploded across the checkered floor. Diana dropped to her hands and knees, crawling toward table 6, her mind blank with terror. Another shot, closer this time. Someone was shouting orders, "Secure the witness! Secure the witness!" But she couldn't process who or why. Then a hand grabbed her shoulder, firm but not rough, and pulled her behind the relative safety of the lunch counter. Diana looked up into the face of one of the tactical team members, a man with cold gray eyes and a radio piece in his ear. "Stay down," he ordered. "Don't move." More gunfire. The sound of bodies hitting the floor. Someone screaming. And through it all, Diana could only think one impossible thought. This is happening because I helped him. Because I stopped. The shooting lasted maybe 30 seconds, though it felt like hours. When silence finally fell, broken only by sobbing and the distant wail of sirens, Diana dared to lift her head. The scarred man was on the ground, bleeding from his shoulder, being zip-tied by 2 of the tactical team. His partner was motionless near the overturned table 8, a pool of blood spreading beneath him. And standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 more men in expensive suits, was the stranger from last night. Gustavo Fonti looked different in daylight, less vulnerable, more dangerous. His tailored suit was immaculate, his dark hair perfectly styled. The wound she'd bandaged was hidden beneath Italian wool and silk. But his eyes, when they found hers across the chaos of the destroyed diner, held the same intensity she'd seen in the rain. He walked toward her slowly, his men clearing a path, and Diana realized with absolute certainty that she had never been in more danger, or more protected, than she was in this exact moment. "Miss Sullivan," he said quietly, extending his hand to help her up. "I believe we need to talk." Diana's legs threatened to give out as Gustavo led her through the chaos of the destroyed diner, past overturned tables and shattered glass, past customers still huddled on the floor and Lou staring at his ruined business with hollow eyes. The tactical team moved with efficient precision, securing the wounded attacker, checking the dead one, speaking in clipped codes into their radios. Outside, the convoy of black SUVs had formed a barrier around the diner, and more men in suits stood guard, their eyes constantly scanning the street. Gustavo guided her to the last booth in the back corner, the one that had somehow survived the gunfight intact. He gestured for her to sit, then slid in across from her. Up close, in the harsh fluorescent light, she could see the exhaustion beneath his composed exterior, the tightness around his eyes that spoke of pain barely controlled. "My name is Gustavo Fonti," he said quietly, his accent more pronounced now. "Perhaps you've heard of my family." Diana had. Everyone in the city had. The Fontes weren't just criminals, they were an institution, a shadow government that had run operations in this region for 3 generations. Protection rackets, gambling, construction contracts that somehow always went their way. The kind of power that made police commissioners nervous and politicians cooperative. "The men who came for you work for the Battaglias," Gustavo continued, his dark eyes never leaving hers. "Our rivals. They think you know where I was that night, or worse, that I told you something valuable. Your act of kindness painted a target on your back that won't wash off." Diana's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table. "I don't know anything. I just helped someone who was hurt." "I know." Something that might have been regret flickered across his face. "But they don't believe that. And they won't stop until they've questioned you themselves, which you wouldn't survive." He leaned forward slightly. "Miss Sullivan, whether you like it or not, you're in my world now. And in my world there are only 2 choices. You accept my protection or you die." The safe house was a penthouse in the financial district, all floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist furniture that probably cost more than Diana's entire building. 2 of Gustavo's men stood outside the door, silent as statues. Another watched the elevator. A 4th monitored security feeds from a room down the hall. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage and the bars were made of men with guns. Diana stood at the window staring down at the city 20 floors below, watching people live their normal lives. Going to work. Meeting friends for coffee. Complaining about traffic and bills and mundane problems that suddenly seemed precious beyond measure. She'd called Lou from the car, listened to him tell her not to worry about her job, that he understood. But his voice had been shaky, traumatized. She'd brought violence into his diner, into the lives of everyone there. All because she'd stopped in the rain. The lock clicked behind her. She didn't turn around, already knowing who it was by the way the guard's posture shifted in the window's reflection. "You can't keep me here forever," Diana said. Gustavo's footsteps were quiet on the hardwood. "No. But I can keep you alive long enough to resolve this situation." "What situation?" She spun to face him, anger finally breaking through the numbness. "I don't know anything. I didn't see anything. I helped a bleeding man and now my entire life is gone. My apartment, my job, my freedom. All of it stolen because I made one decent choice." "I know." He looked tired, the bandage beneath his shirt probably pulling with every movement. "And I'm sorry for that. Sorry doesn't give me my life back." Gustavo was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her with that same calculating intensity. Then he said something she didn't expect. "You want to know why your life is worth this trouble? Why I'm spending resources, risking exposure, protecting a waitress I met for 5 minutes." He moved closer and his voice dropped. "Because you didn't see a crime boss bleeding in the rain, Miss Sullivan. You saw a man who needed help. No one has seen me that way in 30 years. That kind of sight is rare enough to be worth protecting." Diana woke to the taste of copper and cloth, a gag cutting into the corners of her mouth. Her head throbbed where something hard had struck her skull, and when she tried to move, plastic zip ties bit into her wrists. The cold hit her next, seeping up through concrete into her bones. She was sitting in a metal chair in the middle of a vast, empty warehouse, the kind of space where screams would echo and then die. Overhead lights flickered on with industrial clicks, blinding her. She squeezed her eyes shut, then forced them open, trying to focus through the pain. Shapes materialized from the darkness, men in dark clothing forming a loose circle around her. At least a dozen of them, all armed, all watching her with the casual indifference of people who'd seen this scene play out many times before. Footsteps approached from behind, expensive shoes on concrete. A hand gripped her hair, yanking her head back, and Diana found herself staring up into a face that belonged in nightmares. Vincent Battaglia was older than Gustavo, maybe 60, with silver hair slicked back and eyes like chips of ice. His smile was worse than any scowl. "The Good Samaritan," he said, his voice carrying an accent thicker than Gustavo's. "The little waitress who saved Gustavo Fonti's life." He released her hair and circled to face her, hands clasped behind his back like a professor lecturing a student. "You know what's funny? I don't actually care what you know. I don't care what he told you that night, if anything." He leaned down until his face was inches from hers. "You're not here for information, sweetheart. You're here because Gustavo cares what happens to you, which means you're the perfect knife to twist. When he comes for you, and he will come, my men will be waiting. And I'll make sure you're alive just long enough to watch him die." Battaglia straightened, checking his watch. "He should get my message any minute now. The one with your picture. Let's see how fast the great Gustavo Fonti moves when someone he values is bleeding." The photograph arrived on Gustavo's phone at 3 a.m, pulled him from shallow sleep into immediate crystalline focus. Diana bound to a chair, blood dried at her temple, eyes wide with fear but still defiant. The message below was simple: half your territory. 48 hours. Or she dies screaming. For his war room was full. 8 of his most trusted lieutenants crowded around the table in his private office, studying maps, surveillance photos, phone intercepts. Marco Cellini, his second-in-command for 15 years, stood with arms crossed, his weathered face set in disapproving lines. "It's a trap," Marco said flatly. "Battaglia wants you to come. He's probably got 50 men in that warehouse, all waiting for you to play hero." "I'm aware," Gustavo replied, his eyes never leaving the photograph of Diana. "Then you know we can't go in." "Not for this." Marco gestured at the phone. "She's a civilian. A waitress you knew for one night. We lose men going after her, we lose territory, we lose respect. Every family from here to Boston will see it as weakness." The room fell silent. Other heads nodded in agreement, carefully neutral expressions hiding the same calculation. One life weighed against power, against empire, against everything Gustavo had built. "How many men can we mobilize in 12 hours? Gustavo asked quietly. "Boss," Marco started. "How many?" 20. "Maybe 25 if we pull from the dock operations." Marco's jaw tightened. "You're really doing this? You're going to war over a woman you don't even know?" Gustavo finally looked up from the photograph, and something in his expression made Marco take a half step back. "She knew me for 5 minutes and risked everything to help. No questions. No hesitation. She saw someone bleeding and stopped." He set the phone down carefully on the table. "I've spent 30 years building an empire on fear and violence. I've made men disappear. I've ordered deaths. I've become exactly what my father wanted me to be. A monster who commands respect through terror." He met Marco's eyes. "Maybe I have gone soft. Or maybe I'm just tired of being that monster. Either way, we're getting her out." "This will cost us," Marco warned. "I know," Gustavo said. "But some debts can't be measured in territory." The explosion came first, blowing out the warehouse's east loading door in a shower of twisted metal and concrete dust. Diana's ears rang, her vision blurring as flashbangs detonated in rapid succession, turning the world into white noise and chaos. Battaglia's men opened fire immediately, muzzle flashes strobing in the darkness, but Gustavo's team moved like ghosts through the smoke, tactical precision honed by years of violence. It lasted 90 seconds. Bodies hit the floor. Men screamed orders that no one could hear. Diana felt hands cutting her zip ties, lifting her from the chair, and for one desperate moment she thought it was over, that she was safe. Then cold metal pressed against her temple, and Battaglia's arm locked around her throat from behind. "Fonti." His voice cut through the ringing in her ears. "Show yourself or I paint the walls with her brain." The gunfire stopped. Smoke hung thick in the air, illuminated by the warehouse's flickering overhead lights. Diana could see Gustavo's men fanning out in a semicircle, weapons raised but holding fire. And then Gustavo himself stepped through the smoke, his suit jacket discarded, his white shirt marked with someone else's blood. He held a gun loose at his side. "Let her go, Vincent," Gustavo said, his voice carrying across the space with calm authority. "This ends now." "You're right about that." Battaglia pressed the gun harder against Diana's skull, and she whimpered despite herself. "Here's your choice, Gustavo. Take your shot. Maybe you're fast enough. Maybe you kill me before I kill her. Or maybe her blood is the last thing you see before my boys gun you down." Marco appeared at Gustavo's shoulder, weapon raised. "Boss, we have the angle. Stand down." Gustavo lowered his gun and then slowly placed it on the concrete floor. The sound of metal on stone echoed through the warehouse. His men stirred uneasily but held their positions. Battaglia laughed, but there was surprise in it. The great Gustavo Fonti, disarmed by a waitress. "Name your terms," Gustavo said. "The South Harbor operations. The construction contracts in the financial district. 5-year non-aggression pact independently brokered. You let her walk out of here and you get what you wanted without losing half your men." He spread his hands. "Or we all die in this warehouse tonight. Your choice, Vincent." The restaurant was called Sullivan's Table, a modest storefront with exposed brick walls and mismatched vintage chairs that somehow worked together. Diana moved through the kitchen with practiced ease, plating the evening's special while her small staff worked in comfortable synchronization around her. Through the service window she could see the dining room filling with neighborhood regulars, people who came for the food and stayed for the warmth she'd somehow built into every corner of this place. 3 months since the warehouse. 3 months since Battaglia had lowered his gun and taken Gustavo's deal, since she'd walked out of that hell into the cold dawn. The nightmares still came sometimes, but they were fading, replaced by the rhythm of this new life she was building from scratch. The funding had appeared through a lawyer's letter, a shell corporation with an untraceable paper trail offering her a lease and startup capital. No strings. No contact. Just an opportunity wrapped in enough distance to keep her safe from the shadows of that world. Outside, a black sedan idled at the curb, engine running. Gustavo sat in the back seat, watching through tinted windows as Diana emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, smiling at something a customer said. She looked different now, lighter somehow, like a weight had lifted that she hadn't known she was carrying. This was who she was supposed to be. Not a waitress scraping by, but someone creating something beautiful and her own. His phone buzzed. A message from Marco. "The Battaglias are honoring the pact. Harbor operations transferred clean." Gustavo typed a response, then deleted it. Some things didn't need acknowledgement. On the seat beside him lay a card that had arrived at his office that morning, forwarded through 3 intermediaries. Plain white envelope, careful handwriting he recognized from that first morning. Inside just 4 words, "Thank you for everything." He'd read it a dozen times, these simple words that somehow carried more weight than any contract he'd ever signed. Gustavo allowed himself the faintest smile, tucked the card into his jacket pocket and tapped the driver's shoulder. The sedan pulled away from the curb, merging into evening traffic. Through the rear window, Sullivan's Table grew smaller, its warm light spilling onto the sidewalk like a promise kept. The monster and the saint, forever bound by a rainy night when one moment of compassion proved stronger than a lifetime of fear.